Hey everybody, my name is Zach REDRUP. You're listening to the It's Not a Phase podcast, and today I am joined by Nico LaRocca, who is an A&R over at Thriller Records and InVogue Records. We talk all about what an A&R is and does, how he got his first foot into the music industry, the difference between the two labels and signing acts for them, what bands should consider before signing with a label, the power of TikTok, and loads more. Now, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast and you want to show your support, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. It takes just a few seconds and it really does help. Number two, share this on your social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Or number three, if you want to go the extra mile, you can pay a little bit each month to join the Patreon, and in return you'll get access to episodes early along with some other perks, or you can pick up some merch from the store. All the links to that and the podcast socials where you can follow us can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's episode of It's Not a Phase. What's up everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of It's Not a Phase. I'm joined by Nico LaRocca, who is an A&R at Thriller Records and InVogue Records. How you doing, man?
Good, man. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been great so far talking to you a little bit, but yeah, I'm excited to dive into some stuff. I love your podcast.
Thanks very much. And more than happy to have you on. So I want to just to start off, cover the very, very basics. For people listening who may not know, can you briefly explain in your own words what an A&R is and what an A&R does within a label?
Right. Well, there's different levels of being an A&R. The base one is, which I think most people have knowledge about, is an A&R scout, representative scout. Those are the kind of A&Rs that are going to a lot of shows and bringing artists to the table for labels to look at and get a more in-depth, deep dive look at. That's a lot of what I do. It has a bunch of different variations, but being here in LA, I spend a lot of time going to shows and taking videos for the label to check out, and then doing a lot of intro calls too. Like that's a big part of my job. Several times a week, I schedule different calls with new artists that I've never talked to before, doing video chats and phone calls and just getting an idea of like where their heads are at, what their goals are for the rest of the year, live shows, stuff like that. Like if they have goals for touring, who they want to be represented in, like in the space. Those are a lot of big things that a scout does. I've been doing that for quite a long time now. Definitely a much more in-depth role working at Thriller and InVogue for sure. But I have a lot of experience, with contracts and bringing new artists to the table. Artist development is like what I pride my work on, even if it's artists that are, very base level. The music speaks for itself, so there's no reason to filter that kind of stuff and not work with artists who have like 100 monthly listeners. If the music is good, then the music is good. But yeah, a big part of it is scouting. I do a lot of administrative work too at Thriller and InVogue, which is more of like the legal side of things. So I'm dealing with a lot of lawyers and attorneys and managers. We get to the bottom of like producer agreements and feature agreements, writer splits, a lot of label waivers. That stuff is very new to me, but I've been doing it for about a year now and definitely getting the hang of it and starting to be more comfortable, working with a bunch of different people that I've never met before, but it's really awesome getting my name out there. And even if it's just emailing people and saying, hey, Nico from Thriller Records here. Nice to meet you. Let's get to the bottom of this agreement. That's probably going to take 3 months out of our life. But, that stuff is really important. And it's a lot of waiting sometimes because there's a lot of people that have to agree on stuff and communication between different labels and management and artist teams. But, it's important to have those kind of things so people can get paid for their royalties and everyone understands like split agreements, percentages on masters, stuff like that. And, no one wants to get sued. So that's definitely a big part of the job for sure. And then, another aspect of A&Ring is more of like the recording side and getting albums and EPs and singles done. Like a couple times this past year, I've flown out of the state to go meet some of our artists and be in the studio with them while they're creating songs. Picking singles for albums, track listing, stuff like that, even getting my hands dirty a little bit with lyrical content and ideas on riffs and stuff. I don't want to take like creative control away from the producers and the artists, but it's nice to see when artists and producers do have that level of respect for A&Rs that can give, just have a good ear for music and can tell like what stuff is doing well in the scene, what's trending and things like that. Like even if it is lyrics and riffs or like different drum patterns and stuff, like that's why we are A&Rs, you know. So it's nice to know when bands like take that creative criticism very well. But those are like the main parts of A&Ring that I have had experience with doing, and that's like my full understanding of what the job is. It's very in depth, very hands-on. A lot of the different roles here at the label are very hands-on. We do like weekly calls with our artists and management teams, same time, same day, every week, even if it's 10 minutes, you know, just checking in with everyone. That stuff is very important. Communication is the number one thing. You never want to leave an artist in the dark and wondering like what the next move is and stuff like that, because, you know, we do have a good amount of artists here. I think between both labels, we have about 20 different artists that I tap into pretty much every one of them now, even if it's just like setting up time with new producers, setting up like songwriting and different production with different producers. Like it's a very hands-on experience too.
Do you have like a favorite part of the job, or the part of the job that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, scouting I think will always be my favorite part of it. You know, I've always gone to shows even before I was actually in the industry. So seeing new artists and finding things. I spend a lot of time on TikTok now too, believe it or not. Like I was very anti-TikTok before all of these artists started popping up on there. But yeah, I spend a certain amount of time on that app each week too, just trying to find the next big thing that's buzzing. And, you know, a big part of it is getting on there early before, you know, all the majors start making offers too, because then we have to compete with people like that. But, you know, just the rush and the adrenaline and the excitement of finding a new artist, it's always going to be my favorite part of it, I think. But the other aspects of it are also very important. So learning the whole net of being an A&R is I love it all. Like I knew I was always going to want to do this role in the long term, because I've dabbled in a few different things. Being at an independent label before, I had to fill out a bunch of different roles as well. But I always took pride in being an A&R and just finding new artists that, you know, we really love and we want to put time and invest our time and money into. So I think that's always going to be the best part of it.
Well, you mentioned TikTok. I imagine that's kind of where you came across a band like Honey Revenge, because I knew they were kind of blown up on TikTok.
Yeah, Honey Revenge was actually one of the first artists we had at Thriller. That was even before I joined on, but I know, you know, my founder, Bob, he definitely came across them on TikTok for sure. I knew Devin before she was even started Honey Revenge. She was in a band called Forever Emerald before that too. And, you know, she's just an amazing networker. Like I've never met someone who just goes and talks to people and goes to different shows as much as she does. But, you know, that's how you do things these days. Like obviously a big part of it is TikTok and getting your name out there to the masses, but also being in person and showing your face and going to shows and talking to different people is a huge part of it. But we respect that hustle a lot. You know, that's like another big green flag and an attraction for labels, is to working with artists that have that kind of charisma and stuff too.
Yeah, definitely. Well, looking back a bit further, when did young Nico start getting interested in music? What were like the first kind of bands that you fell in love with and albums that you fell in love with?
Yeah. Oh, I love answering this question. I feel like it's quite unique. Maybe it's not to most people, but I definitely have enjoyed my journey so far. So I'll take it back a little bit. When I was in high school, I guess even before that, you know, I was listening to a bunch of bands like Linkin Park and Slipknot, and, you know, the whole new metal kind of thing was really where I started. And then it kind of just grew from there really quickly. Like I got really into heavy music when I was in high school, like bands like Traitors and Black Tongue, Moralist and stuff like that, like really, really heavy, sludgy deathcore. But at the same time, you know, I also liked bands like Neck Deep and The Story So Far and the whole pop punk thing. So I'd like to think, you know, that my scope for music is very broad. And I think that's also a good quality for an A&R, is to not just have tunnel vision for one genre, because there's so many different artists out there and I want to have my ear to the ground on as much as possible. I don't really dabble in country, I guess I could say that. Like from time to time, growing up in Arizona, a lot of people listen to country. So I definitely enjoy a few artists, but yeah, I don't listen to much of that these days. A lot of actually SoundCloud rap too is some of my favorite music artists. Like, do you know Goth Boy Click?
Yep, I know them, yeah.
Yeah, like Lil Peep, Lil Tracy, Coldheart, Horsehead, all those guys. Yeah. After I moved out here to California, I started really getting into that stuff too. So but yeah, in high school, I was playing basketball for a really long time, and I was like I was like pretty much the only kid on the team that listened to like metal during warm-ups and stuff, and we played in the locker room. So like I always knew like that was going to be somewhat of my future somehow or something like that, because I don't think I was ever destined for the NBA. And then I got really hurt in high school too. Like I busted my knee pretty bad, and I had to have surgery and all that stuff, so I didn't play senior year. And then no, that was junior year. Actually, thinking back on it, that was junior year. And then in Arizona, where I'm from, I started scouting some music schools and stuff like that. Like there was one called Crafts that I did a couple orientations at, and I scouted out the school a little bit, just did like a tour of it, and it was cool and all. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to be in Arizona anymore. I guess that was the main thing. Like because I knew the industry has certain cities where like things are just booming, and that's LA, New York, and now it's Nashville too. Like those are the three big ones in the States where most people in the industry reside. And California being super close, had family out here too. I was like, Mom, Dad, I don't want to be in Arizona anymore. I want to go check out some schools in California. So summer of junior year, I flew out to California, scouted a school called Icon Collective, did a whole orientation there, met some of the people. That was really awesome. Flew back to Arizona, made a decision before I started senior year, and I actually enrolled when I was still in high school. I knew I was going to go there, so kind of slacked off a little bit in senior year and really didn't pay attention as much as I should have. Just started to. I actually made music for a long time too. I was doing the whole SoundCloud rap thing, and making beats, recording my vocals, put songs up on SoundCloud. So that was fun too. And I also think that's a very important quality for A&Rs to have as well. It's obviously great to be business minded and have knowledge of all that too. But I think when it comes to, the more creative side of it, like helping out with the full album and picking singles, and like I said, lyrical content and more instrumental things too, I think it's very important to have come from an artist standpoint as well and have experience, in a studio, making songs, being creative. So I use that to my ability as much as I can as well when helping pick demos and all that stuff for an album or an EP. But yeah, I learned a lot of cool stuff at Icon Collective. It was a great place to be. I met a lot of awesome people. Definitely kept in touch with more of the rockers and metalheads over there, because it was actually a lot of DJs and like EDM stuff too. Met some really cool people in that space as well. But yeah, after that, I got an internship at an indie label out here in LA, did that for a little bit, and then eventually moved up to the role of A&R at that same company. Worked there for a while, kind of hit a ceiling, I guess you would say. I felt like I wasn't growing and learning as much at that place. And then luckily enough, my roommate who I lived with at the time, he was also an A&R at Fearless Records with my current boss, Bob. So I guess Bob called him up one day and was like, hey, do you know any young new A&R artists that are A&R representatives that want to work for a label? And I was the first one that he recommended. First time I talked to Bob, I honest to God, I think we talked on the phone for like almost 3 hours. And I was like,
that's a long call.
It's like this guy's awesome. Like there's something there. There's a connection there. And, I was working some odd end jobs at the time, worked at a restaurant for 5 years. I did like weed delivery service out here in LA, which was wild, definitely a wild job. But yeah, lucky enough, I got the job here, was able to quit those odd end jobs. And, here I am learning as much as I can every single day. And it's been so incredible. I love Thriller and InVogue a lot. Everyone's great here.
So when was it that you kind of realized that you wanted to not just have music as a passion in your life, but also become a career?
Well, I still love the whole artist side a lot, but being here in LA, man, like I thought my music was pretty cool, I guess, but there was just so many people like my age and younger too, who were just doing things so much better. And I have massive respect for those artists. And I just felt like, at the end of the day, I don't think I can compete with that kind of stuff. I'll always love making music, and I like to as much as possible still. But, I wanted to learn the business side of things and really help those developing artists.
Yeah.
Like truly help them, not just be like a buddy manager friend and say like, oh, I can get you some stuff. I know some people, but like I really wanted to learn as much as possible about just the whole music industry in general, because I did have a lot of classes like, synthesizer classes. There was a bunch of stuff like music theory that I learned at this school, but then we also had like music business courses as well. And once I learned about like recording contracts and, writer splits and agreements and stuff like that, that's when I really was like, damn, I like this stuff. This is super cool. And I definitely think there's a future there as well, because at the end of the day, we're still in the music scene. I still get to be around everything that I love, but I can actually be of help to actually the real talented people in the industry, which is awesome. It's very fulfilling. The first real little taste of A&Ring that I got was actually the first Point North record. I think it's called A Light in a Dark Place. Great record, fantastic dudes. I like those guys a lot. They're still doing great things. They moved up to Hopeless a couple of years ago too, which we were a big help with. But that was the first like real experience I got. The band was basically broken up at that point. Like I think it was just the vocalist John and one other guy who was like, they weren't really going to continue anymore, but we kind of put the band together, got other members, and helped create the first album. So that was when I was like, this is really cool stuff. And I think I know it's very base level and there's so much more to it that I don't know yet, but this is like the first taste of what I actually want to do for the rest of my life. So that was like 6-7 years ago already at this point. It's so crazy to look back on it now.
Time flies, man.
Yeah, it really does when you're having fun.
Then, like you say, you're at this label for a bit, and then you eventually went over to Thriller Record, which from what I understand is, you said Bob from Fearless Records and Nick from InVogue kind of coming together and making something new. At what point did you join the team? Because I think you said before you weren't there from like day one, were you, or were you? Yeah,
so the whole inception of Thriller started, it was about a couple of years ago during the pandemic for the most part, like 2020, 2021. I joined on last year around June. So we had, we definitely had a good amount of artists already. But a little background on Bob, he started Fearless, a long time ago, before I was even born. He's been breaking bands since I was alive. So a lot of good knowledge there for sure. I love working with him. But he started Fearless Records early 90s. And then I think it was around like 2017, this entertainment company called Concord, huge company that kind of took over a bunch of different labels around that same time. And he moved down a couple roles. I guess he was offered president role or chairman or something like that. And just wasn't really comfortable with going through a whole ladder of people to approve different stuff. Like that's not how the company was ran for so long. So it was definitely a big change. I guess he decided to sell his portion of the company, took some time off, realized during his time off, he wasn't done yet. There's still some gas in the tank. So he started looking around for other independent labels to possibly join forces with. And I guess the winner of that was Mr. Nick Moore. He's been running InVogue for a long, long time. I think it started like 2009, 2010-ish, around that time. He's also the vocalist of a band called Before Their Eyes, super, super emo band. They made some really awesome music back in the day. They were also signed to Rise Records. And then Bob and Nick joined forces, around 2020-ish. And that's really where it started. We have an umbrella of labels. So it's Thriller Records, InVogue Records. And we also have a more hip hop rap oriented imprint called Psych Tune, which we did. One of our records there was for an artist called Atlas and Gone. It was like a joint record that did really, really well, but there's not a whole lot of movement going on there. I'm always looking to sign different artists to that label too. But those three labels are under the same umbrella. It's all the same staff. Everyone works together on those different artists, and recording contracts are all the same there too. So yeah, Thriller's new. It's only been around for a couple of years now, but I'd like to think that we definitely have a lot of good things going already. Yeah, especially like you just said, like it's such a young label at the moment, but you've got like established bands there like The Word Alive, Rain City Drive, and In Her Own Words. But then you've got newer bands like we mentioned Honey Revenge before, Happy Days. Do you think it's good for a label, especially so young, to have such a mix, not just of genres, but also bands at different stages in their career too? Yeah, it's very beneficial. We don't want to be labeled as, a company that just specializes in one genre, because, we're all fans of different kinds of music. And at the end of the day, it is really about who and connections in the industry and building teams around these different artists. But, it gets very mundane, I feel like, and very just passive if we're working on the same bands that sound very similar. You don't want to sign the same band over and over again, because they'd be competing with each other. And there's no like real opportunities at the end of the day. So yeah, I mean, a lot of metalcore, alternative stuff, pop punk. We do some hip hop and rap too, pop music. There's a very wide range of artists on the label, and size, like you mentioned too. We have artists that are in the millions of monthly listeners, and then others that are very base level, but they all get the same amount of attention. It's all very hands on. There's employees at the company that are dedicated to certain artists, and we all have very specific roles that everyone works on day in and day out. And yeah, no, it's been fantastic working with different levels of artists and watching everyone grow at the same time.
You mentioned before as well that not only do you work for Thriller, but you also kind of like help with InVogue as the other rap imprint as well. I guess more with InVogue and Thriller, how do you kind of determine between the two of them, like differentiate what kind of artists would go to the different labels, to kind of put them in the right place, I guess?
Right. It's a good question. There's a bunch of different variables that come with that. Like, we tend to think of InVogue as more of a very artist development type label. Like, those are generally the acts that need much more attention in their career, artists that are starting off and don't have as big of a fan base as some of our artists on Thriller do. Not that the Thriller artists don't get attention as well in the same aspects and the same areas, but artists that we start on InVogue tend to need more attention and like the touring space. A&Ring is the big thing for those artists too. Even their brand and image and marketing ideas too. Like, we help out a lot with building an artist career on InVogue. Sometimes it's more of like a stylistic thing too. Like I said before, we don't want too many of the same artists on one label. So we tend to split those up too, because, Thriller has a pretty packed out release schedule as well. We try not to do more than one album a month on that label. So if the schedule is too packed and we come across an artist that we want to make a deal with, we'll generally do the first release on InVogue and then move it up to Thriller. That's usually how our deals go. PsychTune is kind of its own entity, because it's such a different genre, and we deal with different things there. So that's kind of like, it's like an InVogue and Thriller in itself. But as far as like, the whole rock and I guess metal alternative world that we deal in a lot, yeah, InVogue and Thriller are separated due to scheduling reasons. And then a lot of the times just when artists need more hands-on artist development for InVogue.
So what bands have you personally like helped bring on to the roster for both of those labels?
God, the first one, I don't want to take all the credit for it, because, a lot of the other team members knew about it already, but Catch Your Breath was the first one that I really helped bring in. Took the first calls with management and the artist team, got to meet them in a couple different places in the US, and, really started the conversation with the rest of the label, helped out with the contract part of it, overseeing the different options and budgets that are included in the deal. And, I could talk about Catch Your Breath for quite a long time, but they have definitely skyrocketed in the best ways possible since signing with us. We put a good amount of attention into them. We've done some influencer campaigns, linked them up with a really great agent, getting some good tours for this year, doing some radio interviews and acoustic playthroughs there. I got to help out, be very, very hands-on with the recording process of their album, and everything's just going really well. They took a nosedive into socials, and they have TikTok brains now, and they're starting to post every single day and always think of fun, cool new content to put on there. And I would honestly say, as crazy as it may seem still, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it too, but the way that TikTok is just so influential to artists these days. Like we mentioned Honey Revenge before too, like I think they have it down to a T, and every artist should try and emulate stuff like that. And, do you know Loveless too? He's doing really well in the scene. Yeah, I think artists like Honey Revenge and Loveless and now Catch Your Breath too, like those are staples as far as in our world of like proof that TikTok is basically one of the most influential tools in the industry these days. It's crazy. Like it turned the industry completely on its head. And now you can find artists, even when I'm scouting, from an A&R standpoint, I go on there for maybe 30 minutes and I'm like, wow, I just found this really cool drummer who's doing insane covers. And oh, wow, look at that. He's in an awesome band too. I might as well check out the band. Yeah, it's a very crazy tool. A lot of great influencers on there that we reach out to for our artists. Just trying to get we call it UGC, user generated content, just trying to get the TikTok sounds out there for our songs. And it really has generated a lot of streams. You can see it translate directly to like Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Tidal, all that stuff. Like we check, we're big analytic guys over here. We check the numbers all the time, but yeah, it's a crazy powerful tool. And now YouTube has shorts and Instagram Reels, same kind of deal, like the vertical content that we see on social media. It's just wild to me still how much that has impacted artists and the whole music scene in general.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like that song King for a Day by Pierce the Veil, like 10 plus years old, goes on TikTok.
Right?
It's became one of like the biggest songs. I think it didn't hit like the number one in the top 100 Billboard rock songs, I think, something like that. That's crazy to think like TikTok alone did that. Yeah.
And the same thing happened with Dial Tone. Like that, when we started pushing that song, it had already been out for almost 18 months, I think, at that point. And so, I don't think artists should get discouraged when things don't pop off right away, especially if you're in an album cycle and there's several singles going. Like there's no reason to stop promoting the song if you have a couple other singles out or like the full album's out. Like anything can catch fire at any point in time. I mean, we saw it with like Stranger Things, that one song, Running Up the Hill, Kate Bush song. It popped up in the charts and now is her biggest streaming song because of a TV show. Like it's so crazy. And the UGC on that song skyrocketed last year. Anything is possible. It's honestly wild to me.
Or even like Bad Omens, they had that song Just Pretend, never put out as a single. And that just blew up. And I was like, I don't know where this has come from.
Yeah, what an incredible record, by the way. I think that's one of my favorite releases of last year. I still listen to it all the time. But yeah, that is a prime example of how things can just absolutely take off on social media these days without it even being a focus track in an album cycle. Like you said, like wasn't even a single, but is now has like 50 million streams on Spotify.
Like that,
I love that for them. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. And then again, like still talking about TikTok, like Sleep Token had that like 7-minute song, which is like super heavy. Then there's this jazz bit and then something like that. And I think within a month, their total monthly listeners on Spotify changed from roughly 200,000 and now it's over 2 million, which is...
Is it over 2 million now? I saw it almost peaking at 2 million. Oh, that's crazy that it's right. Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that song in general and that band in general. Yeah, that project is another prime example of just how things can take off on TikTok. And what happened with Catch Your Breath too, when we signed them, they were at around 60,000 monthly listeners on Spotify and they peaked at just under 1.5 million. And that's just from the influencer campaign that we ran. And, that doesn't have to come from a label. Obviously, the budget does help and the contacts that we have do help, but any independent artist can do that. It's not like you need a team of people at a label to really take a dive and do that for you. And that's also why it's important to network and go out to shows and meet influencers and meet people online. Like anybody can reach out to the same people that we did and get posts and make some buzz happen online. Like it doesn't have to come from a label, but obviously it helps a lot when you have a team. Everyone's just focused on that specific thing.
It's just crazy, man. TikTok's just changed the game, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, flipped it on its head, man. It's crazy.
So once you've brought an artist onto like the label's roster, you personally, what are the next steps that you take with that artist as an A&R?
I guess it varies. Depending on what the contract is, we generally start to get demos together. We'll get them in the studio with producers and songwriters that we think would be the best fit. We like to ask the artists too if they have anyone that they like to work with or they want to work with in the future. And we look to make that happen first, scheduling studio dates, even if it's like, flights to get out here and hotel Airbnbs and stuff like that. Like that's basically the first step to creating an album. And that's the music comes first. That's what we need first. And that's a very in-depth process in itself. It sometimes takes half a year to get an album done
Yeah.
and several different studio sessions. But that is, the first step. And then we create assets around it, start to pick out dates for singles, scheduling around the whole album, tours and interviews and press around it as well. But yeah, the music is first. You definitely need to create an album or an EP in itself first.
And do you kind of prefer working with acts that are a bit more, established and kind of more seasoned in how a label operates, or do you kind of like rearing up new blood, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good when an artist has knowledge about a label, not experience, but just knowledge of like how it all works.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't, and that's okay. Like we definitely pride ourselves on artist development and working with artists that not necessarily need our help. We pride ourselves on our artist development first, but like it's always nice to know that an artist or a band has knowledge of like what a record label actually does, and that's okay if they don't. But no, it's to answer your question, it's great to know that.
So, and when you've got like these new acts on there that don't quite understand how it works, is there sometimes kind of like a communication issue in terms of like, I don't know, do you have any like issues and speed bumps because they don't quite know how things work?
Well, yeah, I mean, that can happen from time to time, but that's why we take a handful of calls and really get to know these people before we dive in and start working with them, because it even comes down to trust too. Like it's going to be generally a few years that we're working together, and both parties have to understand where the other one is coming from and making sure everything gels and that everyone understands exactly like what the goals are and what we're trying to do, so that there's no hiccups and no miscommunications along the way.
Do you ever kind of like want to work with a band? You start trying to have those like first conversations, and I don't know, something about the relationship, you don't quite gel, or something kind of stops things from progressing where they could?
Yeah, that's happened a few times, but if you really believe in the music and the music should always speak for itself, then I think it's just always good to keep getting on the phone and do video calls and like really explain and get down to the bottom of like what this stuff actually means, so that everyone is clear about it, so that everyone knows what the actual plan of attack is going to be.
Yeah, because I can imagine some bands, especially like the newer ones, especially when like the legal side start coming into things, they get a little bit skittish as about like what's going on here, why am I signing this, what does it mean?
Yeah, it's very stressful at times, because that stuff takes a while sometimes. Yeah. And people just get angsty and nervous sometimes, because a lot of it is legal stuff that I guess newer bands just haven't been exposed to, and yeah, it is a turnoff from time to time, but that's why, again, communication is so important, and we understand like what the actual goals and what the actual goals are going to be when working together.
Yeah. What is it that you personally look for when signing a new act?
Like I said, it all comes down to the music. It's great to know when an artist also has a team around them. Generally, that first part of the team is a manager. Sometimes, it's an agent as well. Generally, I've found that most independent artists have a harder time getting agents on their team before a label joins on. I'm not saying it's impossible, but a lot of the times when we reach out to artists, they just have a manager, if anything, but a lot of the times they're completely independent. They don't have any third-party help. They don't have anyone around there, but that's a big part of what we like to see in a label, is that there's support outside of us already, and that there's people that believe in the artist as well and are working day in and day out to help them before even signing a record deal. But yeah, I mean, with all that said, if an artist has an incredible voice and incredible sound and they do really well on the road, and there's already an established fan base there, then we can come in and help build a team as well outside of ourselves. But the music will always speak for itself.
So if there's a band listening now who's kind of, they're interested in either being signed to Thriller or InVogue or any other label really, what advice would you give? Like, what do they need to know, not only to get a label's attention, but also to know that they're at a point where they're ready to work with a label? Right.
And I'm glad you said ready, because a lot of the times, I feel like artists aren't ready. There's a lot of things that they do need to work on. And I would say the biggest thing, even though we're in a digital age where social media is very important, it's still just as important to get out on the road, play local shows, really lock down your area first and then branch out a little bit and start doing some tours and actually get in front of real people who will buy your merch and, take pictures with you and then support you on streaming services and online and stuff like that. And that's also a very important thing for an A&R and a label, is to see a band play live. Like a lot of the times I'm coming across artists before I even go out to shows or see any live footage or anything like that. But, it's important to see them, how they interact with the crowd and what their live set actually sounds like. If they can compete with the studio versions of the song, that's a big thing. And then meeting them in person, it's great to be able to have video calls and, talk to as many artists as possible around the world, but seeing them in person and actually gelling with them and feeling out their vibe, that's a very big thing.
And for those listening who aren't in bands, but, they're interested in a career in A&R themselves, what advice would you give them to, take a step into that side of the industry and, kind of try and get their foot in the door of a label themselves?
Yeah, just speaking from experience, it's all about doing it. Like if you have a passion for music, I say go for it, man. There's no reason not to. Like myself, I went to school for not A&R, not music business. I obviously learned a little bit about it, but I went to school to be an artist and actually try and make a career out of making music. But, I guess the first step to actually getting in the industry is reaching out to DIY labels, trying to get an internship, even if you're doing coffee runs and random, grunt work on social media. That's where a lot of people start. That's where I started myself too. And then you gain respect within the company and you start to develop what kind of roles you actually want to do. For me, I always knew it was going to be A&R. You have to trust your ear and you have to keep up with trends and figure out what not only other artists, but what other labels are doing too. You have to watch out for all that kind of stuff. But just going for it. Like if you feel in your heart that you want to be connected to music, but you're not, or you don't feel like you're talented enough to make music and be an artist, reach out to labels, reach out to management companies, reach out to agencies. If that's what you want to do, just go for it.
And, you kind of mentioned there, like networking is such an important part of this industry, like you're saying, like making the connections, making an impression in whatever company you might work in, or just knowing other people that might be able to kind of help you get your foot in the door. Like you mentioned before, your friend who was with Fierce at the time pointed you forward to then go over to Filler. And then if that didn't happen, you might not be there right now.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's not like, we're engineers or doctors or anything where you have to study for so long and then you can eventually get your foot in the door from wherever. Yeah, the music industry is a very specific industry where if you know certain people, that's only going to help you more. Like networking will always be one of my main focuses, trying to get out and meet new people all the time. Handshakes are a big thing. First impressions, that kind of stuff will take you very far. You never know where that kind of stuff is going to lead you.
Yeah, like anything could happen. It could happen within the next few weeks after meeting someone, months, even years. Like I've heard people like make connections and then it's only years later that said connection has helped them get their foot into a job that they really wanted.
Exactly. And I think that just comes down to being a good person too. First impressions, like I said, are a big thing. And yeah, I've reconnected with people who I met when I first moved out here and didn't have anything to do with a record label or company yet. And now we work together and utilize each other for different artists and different things to help with an artist development. And yeah, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think it could blow back at you. Like, in the grand scheme of things, everyone's like kind of very close knit and friendly. So if you've kind of got a bad reputation, then that's kind of going to go around as well.
Yeah, that's the worst. I mean, as broad as the music industry may seem, it very much is a small world. Like I've come to know that everyone seems to know everyone in some way, even if you haven't talked to them, like you were definitely aware who everyone is. And that's why, again, it's just, and that's has to do with everything in life, I feel like, but it's just good to have, a good reputation and be a good person. That's going to take you farther than I think being knowledgeable and good at your job. Like they're very hand in hand. They're very equal as well.
So in terms of yourself, your position in Filler Records, this time next year, what do you hope to have achieved for that label and even yourself as an A&R?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we actually, a couple of weeks ago, we all wrote down our goals and we have different things that we want to do as a company and just ourselves in general. I guess a big one for the company now would be we want to get an actual office here in LA because our main office is in Ohio. I fly out there a couple times a year and go to work with them for like a week at a time. And, we want to create a central hub here in LA for our employees that are out here, artists, producers that can come in. I want to keep signing more artist development acts, especially for InVogue. We want to keep growing that brand and bringing artists on there. I just want to focus on mastering the new aspects of A&Ring that I'm learning this year, like more of the administrative side of things. Definitely have a good hang of it already, but I want to be able to get to the point where like that stuff is just second nature, and then I can come in and then another person can come in and I can teach them, help them fill those shoes so that I can put my focus on more big picture things and helping out with more of the creative side of it as well.
Well, it sounds really exciting, dude. I'm sure you'll kill it like this time next year. Who knows where you're going to be?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Maybe in a year from now, we can check back in and do this all over again and maybe have some more stories for you and have some more knowledge to hand off.
Yeah, that's not, we'll get it in the diary, man. We'll do that.
Awesome. I love it.
Before I let you go, Nico, and, get on with the rest of your day, are there any final words you want to say? Anything you want to share, plug? The floor is yours.
Yeah, we have a lot of cool things coming up right now. Actually, today, the day that we're recording this, one of our artists, her name is Kaylee Morg. She just did a collab track with Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park. It's actually one of the songs in the new Scream movie. So go and check that out. You'll hear the song within the first couple minutes of the movie. It's really awesome. We have artists like Catch Your Breath, Dark Divine going on some good tours this year. Rain City Drive is going out with Fame on Fire and Our Last Night. We have Call Me Charisma in the UK right now doing a big run. Yeah, a lot of exciting records coming out that I wish I could tell you about, but they will be out soon enough. So, just be on the lookout. We have some great things coming.
Just got to be patient and wait for it to come out.
Unfortunately, yes, but it'll be well worth the wait for sure.
Well, thanks very much again, Nico. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This has been a blast. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks so much. Catch you later.
Bye-bye.
And that is it. Thank you so much for listening. Again, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast, then please leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. If you want to support the podcast further, you can go and give it a follow on social media, pick up something from the merch store, or subscribe to the Patreon to get early access to episodes. All the links can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again, hopefully catch you on the next one, and remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.